The black maid's daughter went missing in the mansion. Billionaire's reaction left everyone speechless. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Whitmore estate, casting long shadows across the Italian marble floors. Sarah Mitchell moved through the East Wing with practiced efficiency, her cleaning cartwheels making soft whispers against the polished surface. At 28, she had worked at the mansion for nearly 2 years, and every morning followed the same careful routine. But this morning felt different. Sarah paused at the top of the grand staircase, her heart suddenly racing for reasons she couldn't explain. She pulled out her phone and checked the time, 7:47 a.m. Maya should have been awake by now. Her 3-year-old daughter was an early riser, usually padding into Sarah's room around 7, dragging her worn stuffed rabbit and asking for breakfast in that sweet, sleepy voice that made everything worthwhile. Sarah had left Maya sleeping peacefully in their small quarters, the converted servants' wing on the mansion's 3rd floor. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, and Mr. Whitmore had been generous enough to allow Maya to live there when Sarah had shown up to the job interview 2 years ago, a single mother desperate for work that came with housing. She tried to shake off the unease. Maya was probably still sleeping, tired from yesterday's play in the mansion's garden. But something gnawed at Sarah's instincts, the same maternal intuition that had kept her and Maya afloat through impossible circumstances. Setting down her supplies, Sarah hurried back through the labyrinth of hallways toward their quarters. The mansion was enormous, over 40 rooms spread across 3 floors, and she knew every inch of it. As she climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, her walk became a jog, then a run. "Maya," she called out, pushing open the door to their small bedroom. The twin bed where Maya slept was empty, covers thrown back. "Maya, baby, where are you?" Sarah's voice cracked as she searched the tiny bathroom, the kitchenette, under the bed. Her daughter's favorite rabbit lay on the pillow, but Maya was nowhere to be found. Fighting panic, Sarah raced back into the hallway. Maybe Maya had gotten curious and wandered off. She was an adventurous child, always asking questions, always exploring. But she knew the rules. Never leave their quarters without Mommy. For the next 20 minutes, Sarah tore through the 3rd floor, calling Maya's name with increasing desperation. She checked every room, every closet, every corner. Other staff members joined the search. Maria from the kitchen, Thomas the groundskeeper, elderly Mrs. Chun who managed the household. By 8:30 a.m., Sarah was sobbing, her professional composure completely shattered. "She's gone," she kept saying. "My baby is gone." Mrs. Chun placed a steady hand on Sarah's shoulder. "We need to tell Mr. Whitmore. Now." Sarah's stomach dropped. Alexander Whitmore was a kind employer, but he was also a billionaire tech mogul whose time was worth more per minute than she made in a month. He had important meetings, conference calls with Singapore and London. He couldn't be bothered with the domestic crisis of a maid. But Mrs. Chun was already walking toward the main house, toward Mr. Whitmore's private study. Alexander Whitmore sat at his mahogany desk, reviewing contracts for a merger worth $800 million. At 35, he had built his empire through focus, discipline, and an almost supernatural ability to shut out distractions. The mansion was quiet, exactly how he preferred it. His staff knew better than to interrupt him during morning work hours. So when Mrs. Chun knocked urgently on his study door, he felt a flash of irritation. "Yes." His voice was clipped, professional. Mrs. Chun opened the door, and behind her, he could see Sarah Mitchell, the quiet maid with the kind eyes, trembling and tear-stained. Something in his chest tightened. "Mr. Whitmore," Mrs. Chun said steadily. "There's an emergency. Sarah's daughter is missing." Alexander stood immediately, the contracts forgotten. He'd seen Maya around the mansion, a tiny, bright-eyed child who occasionally waved at him shyly from behind her mother's legs. He'd approved Sarah's employment specifically because she'd been honest about her situation, and something about the determination in that young mother's eyes had impressed him. "How long?" he asked, his voice shifting from annoyance to command. "At least an hour, maybe more," Sarah managed to choke out. "She was in our room when I started work at 7. I checked on her at 7:45, and she was gone. We've searched the entire 3rd floor." "The entire mansion," Alexander corrected, already moving toward the door. We searched the entire mansion. He pulled out his phone. I'm calling the police. No. Sarah's voice was panicked. Please, I can't if they get involved, if child services thinks I'm neglectful. Alexander looked at her sharply, and for the first time, he really saw her. Not just as an employee, but as a terrified mother facing every parent's worst nightmare. He also saw something else in her eyes, the fear of a woman who had probably fought hard to keep her child, who lived on the edge of a system that could take everything away. We'll find her first, he said quietly. But if we don't find her in the next 30 minutes, I'm calling everyone, police, FBI if necessary. Understood. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. What happened next would leave everyone speechless, but not for the reasons anyone expected. Alexander Whitmore transformed before their eyes. Gone was the aloof billionaire who rarely spoke to his staff beyond polite greetings. In his place stood a man with military precision, organizing search teams, delegating responsibilities, and treating Maya's disappearance as if she were his own child. Thomas, check the grounds, every garden, the greenhouse, the pool house, the garages, Alexander commanded, his voice steady but urgent. Maria, search the kitchen areas, the pantries, anywhere a small child might hide. Mrs. Chen, coordinate from the security office and review this morning's camera footage. He turned to Sarah, who was shaking so badly she could barely stand. You're with me. We'll search the main floors together. You know your daughter. Where would she go? What is she like? Sarah tried to focus through her panic. She loves hiding places. Small spaces where she feels safe. She likes to pretend she's in a castle, like the princesses in her books. She's obsessed with pretty things, sparkly things, paintings, flowers. The gallery, Alexander said suddenly. The art gallery on the second floor. It has paintings she might be drawn to. He was already moving, taking the stairs two at a time, with Sarah struggling to keep pace. The mansion's private art gallery housed Alexander's collection, millions of dollars worth of paintings, sculptures, and installations. He rarely went there himself anymore, too busy to appreciate the beauty he'd invested in. But as they burst through the heavy oak doors, he saw the space through new eyes, through the eyes of a 3-year-old who might see it as a magical kingdom. Maya, Sarah called out, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. Baby, please. Mommy's here. Silence. They moved through the gallery systematically, checking behind sculptures beneath benches. Alexander found himself thinking about the layout differently now. Where could a toddler hide? What would attract a child's attention? The storage room, he said, pointing to a door at the gallery's far end. I keep overflow pieces in there. But the storage room was empty except for bubble-wrapped paintings and dust. As they exited back into the main gallery, Sarah suddenly crumpled against the wall, sliding down until she sat on the floor, her head in her hands. The professional mask she'd maintained for 2 years completely shattered. This is my fault, she sobbed. I should have checked on her more. I should have. I'm a terrible mother. I was so focused on doing a good job, on not losing this position, that I didn't watch my own daughter closely enough. Alexander surprised himself by kneeling beside her, his $8,000 suit touching the floor, without a second thought. Stop, he said firmly but gently. You're an excellent mother. I've seen how you are with her. Patient, loving, present. This is not your fault. Sarah looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes, surprised by his tone. You've seen me with her? He nodded slowly. I see more than people think. I've watched you teach her colors while cleaning windows. I've seen you pack her lunch with little notes even though she can't read yet. I've heard you singing to her when you thought no one was listening. He paused. My own mother never did any of that for me. The vulnerability in his voice shocked Sarah into silence. For a moment, the billionaire and the maid were just two people, connected by concern for a missing child. We'll find her, Alexander said, standing and offering his hand. I promise you, we'll find her. Sarah took his hand, and he pulled her to her feet. As they resumed the search, Alexander's phone buzzed with reports from the team. Nothing from the grounds. Nothing from the kitchen. Nothing from the security footage, No exits had been breached, which meant Maya was still somewhere inside the mansion. They searched the library, the billiard room, the conservatory. They checked closets and bathrooms and guest bedrooms that hadn't been opened in months. With each empty room, Sarah's hope dimmed a little more, and Alexander's determination grew stronger. In the main hall, they encountered Thomas returning from the grounds, shaking his head. Mrs. Chen arrived from the security office with printed screenshots. Nothing on the cameras, she confirmed. But there are blind spots, the northwest corner, the old servant's stairwell. The old stairwell, Alexander repeated, his eyes widening. The one that leads to the attic. I had it boarded up years ago, but... He was already running, Sarah close behind. The old servant's stairwell was hidden behind a decorative panel in the northwest corner, a remnant from when the mansion had housed a staff of 20. Alexander had ordered it sealed after buying the property, deeming it unnecessary and potentially unsafe. But as they reached the panel, they saw it was slightly ajar, just enough for a small child to slip through. "Maya!" Sarah screamed, and this time, faintly, impossibly, they heard something. A small voice, frightened and tired. "Mommy?" The sound was coming from above, from the attic. Alexander grabbed a flashlight from the hall table and pulled the panel fully open, revealing steep, narrow stairs covered in dust. He tested the first step carefully. It might not be stable. "Let me go first." But Sarah was already pushing past him, maternal instinct overriding everything else. Alexander followed close behind, ready to catch her if the old would give way. The attic was dark and musty, filled with forgotten furniture and old trunks. Dust motes danced in the beam of Alexander's flashlight, and somewhere in the shadows, they heard soft crying. "Maya, baby, keep talking. Where are you?" Sarah's voice was desperate but controlled now, focused entirely on reaching her daughter. "Mommy, I'm stuck. I'm scared." They followed the sound to the far corner, where a massive old wardrobe stood against the wall. The wardrobe door was partially open, and wedged in the narrow space between the wardrobe and the wall, covered in dust and cobwebs, was Maya. Sarah reached her in seconds, pulling her daughter free and into her arms, sobbing with relief. Maya clung to her mother, crying but safe, apparently unharmed except for the dust covering her clothes and face. Alexander stood back, his flashlight illuminating the reunion, and felt something crack open in his chest, some long-sealed compartment where emotions were supposed to live. He watched Sarah hold her daughter, whispering promises and reassurances, and realized he was witnessing something he'd never experienced: pure, unconditional love. His own childhood had been different: nannies, boarding schools, parents who viewed affection as a weakness. He'd built an empire, but he'd never built this, a connection so strong that its temporary breaking could shatter someone completely. "How did you get up here, sweetheart?" Sarah was asking gently, checking Maya for injuries. Maya sniffled. "I saw the pretty door. I wanted to explore, like princesses do. I found the pretty box." She pointed to an old jewelry case on top of the wardrobe, "but then I got stuck and couldn't get out." "We need to get her checked out," Alexander said quietly. "I'm calling Dr. Morrison, my personal physician. He can be here in 20 minutes. Sarah looked up at him, and in her eyes was something that would haunt Alexander: gratitude mixed with fear. "I can't afford." "You're not paying for anything," Alexander cut her off firmly. "This happened in my house, on my property. Besides," his voice softened, "I'm just glad she's safe." As they made their way carefully down the old stairwell, Maya in Sarah's arms and Alexander lighting the way, none of them realized that this was only the beginning of how this day would change everything. Dr. James Morrison arrived at the Whitmore estate in record time, his medical bag in hand and his expression professional but kind. Alexander had cleared out the west sitting room, a comfortable space with soft couches and good light, for the examination. Maya sat on Sarah's lap, thumb in her mouth, her earlier terror fading into exhaustion. She'd stopped crying but remained clingy, fisting her small hands in her mother's uniform every time Sarah tried to set her down. "She seems fine," Dr. Morrison announced after a thorough examination. No injuries beyond some minor scratches and bruises. But given the trauma of being stuck in a dark space for over an hour, I'd recommend watching for signs of anxiety over the next few days. Nightmares, clinginess, regression in behavior. Sarah nodded, fighting fresh tears. The relief of finding Maya safe was now giving way to the crushing weight of what had almost happened. What could have happened? "I'll leave you my number," Dr. Morrison said to Sarah directly, his eyes kind. "If you have any concerns at all, call me. Anytime, day or night." After the doctor left, Alexander returned to the sitting room to find Sarah gathering Maya's few things: a worn backpack, Maya's stuffed rabbit, a sippy cup. Her movements were mechanical, her face carefully blank. "What are you doing?" Alexander asked, though he suspected he already knew. "Packing," Sarah said quietly, not meeting his eyes. "I'll have our things out of the staff quarters by this evening." "I understand completely, Mr. Whitmore. Today was completely unacceptable. I put your property at risk, caused a disruption to your household." "Sarah." His voice was sharp enough that she stopped moving and looked up at him. "Did I say you were fired?" "You don't have to say it. I know how this works." Her voice cracked. "I've been here before, one mistake, one problem, and it's over. And this wasn't just any mistake. My daughter could have been seriously hurt in your home." "She wasn't, though." Alexander crossed the room, standing in front of her, but keeping a respectful distance. "And more importantly, what happened today wasn't your fault. It was mine." Sarah blinked, confused. "How could it possibly be your fault?" "I had that stairwell inadequately sealed. I knew there were access points throughout this mansion that could be dangerous. I grew up in old estates like this one. I should have done a complete safety audit when I knew there was a child living here." He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. "I've been so focused on my work, so caught up in deals and acquisitions, that I didn't think about the fact that a 3-year-old lives under my roof." "That's not your responsibility," Sarah protested. "She's my daughter. My responsibility." "She lives in my house," Alexander countered. "That makes her safety partially my responsibility, too." He paused, then added more quietly, "And honestly, after today, I'd like to do more than the bare minimum of ensuring doors are properly sealed." Sarah stared at him, completely lost. "I don't understand." Alexander gestured to the couch. "Sit. Please. Let me explain something." Hesitantly, Sarah sat, Maya immediately curling into her side, fighting sleep. Alexander took the chair across from them, and for a long moment, he simply looked at the pair. This young mother and her daughter, both exhausted and scared, both trying so hard to hold it together. "I grew up in houses like this," he began, his voice quieter than Sarah had ever heard it. "Old money, old traditions, old expectations. My parents were present, but not really there, if that makes sense. I was raised by staff, nannies, tutors, drivers. Nice people, most of them, but they were paid to care. It's different." Sarah remained silent, sensing he needed to say this. "When I interviewed you 2 years ago, you came into my office with Maya. You remember? She was barely 18 months old, and you brought her because your childcare had fallen through. You apologized profusely, said you understood if that disqualified you." "I remember," Sarah whispered. "I thought for sure I'd blown my chance." "You almost did," Alexander admitted. "I wasn't planning to hire anyone with a child. It seemed complicated, potentially problematic. But then Maya started crying, and you handled it so calmly. You soothed her, gave her your keys to play with, kept the conversation going without missing a beat. And when I asked you why I should hire you, you didn't talk about your qualifications. You talked about how you'd work harder than anyone because you had someone depending on you. You said you understood what it meant to take care of something precious." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "I hired you because I saw something in you that I'd never seen in my own parents, real devotion. And over the past 2 years, I've watched you be the kind of mother I wish I'd had. Patient, present, loving, even while working full-time, even while tired, even while dealing with whatever challenges a single mother faces." Tears were streaming down Sarah's face now. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because what happened today scared you, but it changed me. Alexander said simply. It made me realize that I've been sleepwalking through life, focused on the wrong things. I have this enormous house, more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, and for what? What am I building? What legacy am I leaving? He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling grounds. I don't have a family. I'm 35 years old, and I don't have anyone who would cry if I went missing. No one who would search for me the way you searched for Maya. And today, watching you, watching how terrified you were, how much you love that little girl, it made me understand what I've been missing. Sarah didn't know what to say. This was the most personal conversation she'd ever had with her employer, and she felt suddenly aware of all the boundaries that typically existed between them. I'm not firing you, Alexander continued, turning back to face her. In fact, I want to offer you something different entirely. I want to make this mansion safe for Maya. I want to hire a child safety expert to do a complete audit. I want to convert one of the ground floor suites into proper housing for you both. Something bigger than the staff quarters, with a real kitchen and a yard access for Maya to play safely. Mr. Whitmore, I can't possibly. And I want to set up a college fund for her, he continued, speaking over her objection. Something that ensures that no matter what happens, she'll have opportunities. Because that's what children deserve, opportunities. And security. And a childhood where they don't have to worry. Sarah was shaking her head, overwhelmed. This is too much. Why would you do this? Alexander was quiet for a long moment before answering. Because today, when Maya was missing, something became very clear to me. I've spent 15 years building a fortune, and I have nothing to show for it except money and loneliness. But you have everything that matters. And maybe, if you'll let me, I can learn from you. I can learn what it means to care about something more than the next deal, the next acquisition. He paused, then added with unexpected vulnerability, and maybe Maya can teach me what I never learned as a child, how to see the world with wonder instead of calculating its monetary value. Maya had fallen asleep against her mother, her small chest rising and falling peacefully, seemingly recovered from her ordeal. Sarah looked down at her daughter, then back at Alexander. I don't know what to say. Say you'll stay, Alexander replied simply. Say you'll let me do this. Not because you work for me, but because... He hesitated, then finished honestly. Because I don't want to live in an empty mansion anymore, and I think you and Maya can help me figure out what home actually means. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the doorway of their new suite on the mansion's ground floor, still unable to believe it was real. The renovation had been completed in record time. Alexander had hired an entire team to work around the clock, transforming what had once been a guest wing into a comfortable, safe home for her and Maya. The suite had 2 bedrooms, a full bathroom with a tub perfect for Maya's bath time, a small but modern kitchen, and a living area that opened directly onto the garden through French doors. Every corner had been child-proofed: soft corner guards, electrical outlet covers, cabinet locks, and gates at the top and bottom of any stairs. The windows had specially designed locks that prevented them from opening more than 4 inches. A professional playground had been installed in a fenced section of the garden, visible from their living room. But the space itself was only part of the transformation that had occurred over the past 3 months. Mama, Mr. Alex is here. Maya called out excitedly, abandoning her coloring book to run to the door. At 3.5 years old, she'd grown more confident and articulate, no longer the shy toddler who hid behind her mother's legs. Sarah smiled as she heard Alexander's voice responding to Maya's enthusiastic greeting. Over the past months, their employer-employee relationship had evolved into something that defied easy categorization. Alexander had started joining them for dinner twice a week, at first awkwardly, then with increasing comfort. He'd learned to read Maya's favorite books with all the appropriate character voices. He'd attended her preschool orientation at the private school he'd insisted on paying for. He'd even learned to braid Maya's hair, practicing for an hour one evening until he got it right. Look what I made, Maya was saying, dragging Alexander into their living room by the hand. It's a picture of the garden. Alexander examined the colorful scribbles with genuine interest. This is excellent, Maya. I particularly like how you've captured the roses here. Very impressionistic. Maya beamed, not understanding the word but recognizing the praise in his tone. Sarah watched from the kitchen, where she was preparing dinner, something that had become a routine on the evenings Alexander joined them. She tried to maintain professional boundaries, but Alexander had gently bulldozed through them, insisting that if they were sharing meals, everyone should contribute. He'd fumbled through learning to chop vegetables, had burned more than one pot of rice, and had gradually become a competent sous chef under Sarah's patient instruction. "How was your day?" Alexander asked, settling onto the floor next to Maya, another behavior that would have shocked his board of directors, who were accustomed to seeing him in tailored suits conducting high-stakes negotiations. "Good. We learned about butterflies at school, and Mrs. Patterson said my reading is getting really good." Maya paused, then added conspiratorially, "And I didn't have any accidents today." "That's wonderful," Alexander said seriously, as if discussing a major achievement which, to Maya, it was. "You should be very proud of yourself." Sarah carried a salad to the table, catching Alexander's eye. He'd changed over these months, becoming more relaxed, quicker to smile. The permanent tension she'd noticed in his shoulders when she first started working for him had eased. He laughed more readily, especially at Maya's antics and observations about the world. But something else had changed too, something Sarah tried not to acknowledge but couldn't entirely ignore. The way Alexander looked at her had shifted from distant employer to something warmer, more personal. And if she was honest with herself, she'd started seeing him differently too. Not as the intimidating billionaire who signed her paychecks, but as the man who had spent 2 hours last Tuesday helping Maya search the garden for the perfect leaves for her nature journal. As the man who had called her after midnight one evening, not for work, but to share an article he'd read about supporting children through developmental transitions, worried he wasn't doing enough to help Maya feel secure after her attic ordeal. During dinner, a simple pasta dish that they'd all contributed to making, Maya chattered about her day, while Alexander listened with what appeared to be genuine fascination. Sarah watched them interact and felt her heart squeeze with an emotion she didn't want to name. After Maya had been bathed, read to, and tucked into bed in her new bedroom, painted soft lavender at her insistence and decorated with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, Sarah returned to find Alexander washing dishes in her small kitchen. "You don't have to do that," she said, as she did every time. "I know," he replied, as he always did. "But I want to." He handed her a dish to dry. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever regret it? Taking this job, I mean. Living here, having Maya grow up in this." He gestured vaguely at the mansion around them. Sarah thought carefully before answering. 2 years ago, I was living in a studio apartment that I could barely afford, working 3 part-time jobs, and trying to figure out how to give Maya anything resembling a stable childhood. So no, I don't regret it. This, she gestured around the comfortable suite, is more than I ever dreamed of providing for her. But, Alexander pressed, sensing there was more. "But sometimes I worry about what it's teaching her," Sarah admitted quietly. "About expectations, about the world. Most kids don't grow up with playgrounds in their backyard and trust funds for college. Most kids don't have a billionaire teaching them about art and taking them to the private butterfly conservatory because they expressed interest in butterflies at school." Alexander had done that just last week, heard Maya mention butterflies and arranged a private tour of a local conservatory, complete with a butterfly identification guide he'd purchased for her. "You're worried I'm spoiling her," Alexander said, though his tone held no judgment. "I'm worried about what happens when—" Sarah trailed off, not sure how to finish the sentence. "When you get tired of this. When you remember you have a real life beyond playing house with your maid and her daughter. When you meet someone more appropriate, and this arrangement becomes awkward." "When what?" Alexander prompted gently. Sarah shook her head. "Nothing. I'm being ridiculous." Alexander set down the dish he was washing and turned to face her fully. "Sarah, these past 3 months have been the best of my life. I mean that sincerely. I've learned more about what matters, about what makes a life meaningful, than I learned in the previous 35 years. "Alexander." "Let me finish," he said, using her first name as he'd started doing in private moments. I know this situation is unconventional. I know there are power dynamics and complications. But I also know that when I wake up now, I look forward to the day. I look forward to breakfast with Maya's questions about why the sky is blue, or how old trees can get. I look forward to helping with homework and hearing about her school day. I look forward to these dinners with you both, to teaching Maya new things, to learning from you how to be more present in my own life. He paused, and Sarah could see him gathering courage for whatever he was about to say next. I've been thinking about something, and I want to run it by you. Not as your employer, but as whatever we are to each other now. Okay, Sarah said quietly, her heart beginning to race. I'd like to formally adopt Maya, Alexander said in a rush. Not to replace you as her parent, never that. But to give her legal security, financial protection, a second guardian who's committed to her well-being. I've consulted with lawyers, and it's possible to do what's called a second-parent adoption. You'd retain all your parental rights, but Maya would have the additional security of... Alexander, stop, Sarah interrupted, her eyes wide. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. I've never been more serious about anything. His voice was intense now, passionate in a way Sarah had never heard. I love that little girl, Sarah. Not in some distant, detached way. Actually, truly love her. The way I imagine parents are supposed to love their children. And I want her to know that legally and officially. I want her to have every advantage, every opportunity, every protection I can possibly provide. Sarah felt tears welling up, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was offering. This is insane. People don't just adopt their employees' children. I'm not people, and you're not just an employee. You haven't been for months, and we both know it. Alexander took a careful step closer. Sarah, I need you to understand something. This isn't charity. This isn't some rich man's whim. I'm asking to be a part of Maya's life because I already am, and I want to make that official. I want to be there for her school plays and her first day of kindergarten and her graduation. I want to help teach her to ride a bike and answer her questions about math homework. I want to be someone she can count on, always, not just as long as the current arrangement lasts. But why? Sarah whispered. Why us? Alexander was quiet for a long moment. Because you two taught me what family actually means. Because Maya looks at me like I matter, not like I'm a walking bank account. Because you trust me with her, and that trust is the most precious thing anyone's ever given me. He paused, then added softly, and because somewhere along the way, your little family became my family, and I can't imagine my life without you both in it anymore. Sarah didn't know what to say. The offer was extraordinary, but it was also terrifying. It meant binding their lives to Alexander's in ways that couldn't be easily undone. It meant trusting him not just with Maya's present, but with her future. I need time, she finally said. It's huge, Alexander. I need to think about what it means, what's best for Maya. Of course, he said immediately. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. He smiled gently. That's kind of the point, actually. I'm here. I'm staying. Whatever you decide, I'm committed to being present in Maya's life in whatever capacity you're comfortable with. As Alexander left that evening, Sarah stood at the French doors, watching him cross the garden toward the main house. 3 months ago, she'd been a terrified mother searching for her missing daughter. Now she was facing a choice that could change everything, whether to allow the man who'd helped find Maya to become a permanent part of their lives in the most official way possible. The weeks following Alexander's adoption proposal were complicated. Sarah found herself examining every interaction, every gesture, trying to understand what she truly felt versus what she thought she should feel. Alexander, to his credit, didn't push. He continued showing up for dinners, continued reading to Maya before bed, continued being present without pressure. But the question hung between them, unspoken but constantly there. Sarah confided in Mrs. Chen one afternoon while they were preparing the main dining room for a business dinner Alexander was hosting. I don't know what to do, she admitted, carefully polishing silver. Part of me knows this is an incredible opportunity for Maya, but part of me is terrified. Mrs. Chen, who'd worked for the Whitmore family for over 30 years, looked at Sarah with wise, knowing eyes. Of what? That he'll hurt her? Or that he won't? Sarah paused, startled by the question. What do you mean? I've worked for Alexander since he was a boy, Mrs. Chen said quietly. I watched him grow up in this mansion, lonely and isolated, raised by people who saw him as an obligation rather than a gift. I watched him build walls so high that no one could reach him. And then you and Maya came along, and for the first time in 3 decades, I've seen those walls come down. She set down the plate she was holding and turned to face Sarah fully. But here's what I think you're really afraid of. If you accept his offer, if you let him legally into Maya's life, you're admitting that this isn't temporary. You're admitting that somewhere along the way, you've started caring about him too. Not as an employer, not as a benefactor, but as a man. Sarah felt her face flush. I don't. It's okay to care about him, Mrs. Chun said gently. It's okay to want more than just security for your daughter. It's okay to want happiness for yourself too. That evening, Sarah watched Alexander teach Maya to play chess on a child-sized board he'd purchased. He'd been introducing her to the game gradually, making it fun rather than competitive, praising her creative moves rather than correcting every mistake. What if the knight moved like this? Maya asked, hopping the piece in an impossible direction. Interesting theory, Alexander replied seriously. But then the knight would be very tired from all that jumping, don't you think? The real way is more efficient. He demonstrated the L-shaped move. See? Less work, but still gets where it needs to go. Maya giggled. You're silly, Mr. Alex. I've been called worse, Alexander replied with a grin. Watching them, Sarah made her decision. After Maya was asleep, Sarah found Alexander in the library, reviewing documents for the next day's meetings. He looked up when she entered, and she could see hope and fear warring in his expression. I have some conditions, Sarah said, without preamble. Alexander set down his papers immediately. Okay. First, Maya needs to understand what's happening in age-appropriate ways. We need to talk to a child psychologist about the best way to explain this to her. Agreed. I'll find the best child psychologist available. Second, this doesn't change my job. I'm still staff. I still do my work. I don't want anyone thinking I'm taking advantage or that there's, she struggled for the right word, anything inappropriate happening. Of course, Alexander said quickly. Though for the record, I'd happily change your job if you wanted. You could manage the entire household, oversee all the staff. You're overqualified for cleaning. I like what I do, Sarah insisted. It's honest work and I'm good at it. You're good at everything you do, Alexander said softly. But I understand. What else? Third, we need legally binding protections. I want it in writing that if something happens, if you change your mind, if you get married, if circumstances change, Maya's security is protected. Her college fund, her access to education, everything. It can't be dependent on whatever this is between us. Alexander nodded slowly. I'll have my lawyers draft ironclad protections. But Sarah, you should know, I'm not changing my mind. This isn't a phase or a whim. You can't know that, Sarah protested. People change. Situations change. Then let me prove it, Alexander said, standing and crossing to where she stood. Let me spend every day proving that I'm serious, that I'm committed, that Maya's well-being matters more to me than any business deal or acquisition ever has. Sarah looked up at him, and for the first time, she let herself really see what Mrs. Chun had pointed out. This wasn't just about Maya anymore. Somewhere in the past months of shared dinners and bedtime stories and quiet conversations, something had developed between her and Alexander. Something that terrified her because of all the ways it could go wrong, but also because of how right it felt. Why are you really doing this? She asked quietly. Alexander held her gaze. Honestly? Because I'm in love with both of you. With Maya's wonder at the world, with her laughter, with the way she sees good in everything. And with you, with your strength, your kindness, your fierce protection of your daughter, the way you've taught me what it means to be present in my own life. He paused, then added, I know that complicates things. I know the adoption is enough to process without adding this. But you asked for honesty, so there it is. Sarah felt her breath catch. She'd suspected, maybe even hoped, but hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. "I don't know what this means," she whispered. "I don't know how to navigate this. Us, if there is an US. The power dynamics alone. So we figure it out together," Alexander interrupted gently. Slowly, carefully, always putting Maya first. No pressure, no expectations. Just possibility. Sarah thought about it, really thought about it. About the man Alexander had been 3 months ago versus who he was now. About how he looked at Maya with genuine love, not obligation. About how he'd changed his entire life to make room for them, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. "Okay," she finally said. "Okay to the adoption. Okay to figuring this out. But slowly, Alexander. We do this slowly and right." The smile that broke across Alexander's face was radiant, transforming him from the serious billionaire into someone younger, lighter, genuinely happy. "Slowly and right," he agreed. "I can do that." 2 months later, on a sunny Tuesday morning, they sat in a lawyer's office finalizing the adoption paperwork. Maya sat between them, coloring in a special book Alexander had bought for the occasion, not quite understanding what was happening, but pleased to be included. The lawyer walked them through the final documents. Sarah had reviewed everything multiple times, had consulted with her own attorney, paid for by Alexander but independently chosen, and was satisfied that Maya's interests were protected regardless of what happened in the future. "This is fairly unusual," the lawyer commented as they signed. Second-parent adoptions are typically done by married couples or long-term partners. "We're a family," Alexander said simply, looking at Sarah and Maya. "That's what matters." And despite all the complexity, all the unconventional aspects of their arrangement, Sarah found herself agreeing. They were a family, maybe not a traditional one, but a real one nonetheless. As they left the lawyer's office, Maya slipped her hands into both of theirs, Sarah on one side, Alexander on the other. "Are we going for ice cream now?" she asked hopefully. "Definitely," Alexander confirmed. "This is an ice cream kind of day." Walking down the street like that, the three of them together, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in years. Genuine hope for the future. Not just security or stability, but actual happiness. The kind that came from being part of something bigger than yourself. Whatever came next, they would face it together. 8 months after Maya's disappearance in the attic, the Whitmore estate looked much the same from the outside, grand, imposing, a monument to wealth and success. But inside, everything had changed. Sarah stood at the French doors of their suite, watching Alexander and Maya in the garden. They were planting flowers together, or more accurately, Alexander was attempting to plant while Maya helped by distributing far too much water and talking nonstop about a story her teacher had read that day. And then the caterpillar ate through 1 apple, and then 2 pears, and then 3 plums. Maya was explaining enthusiastically, her small hands covered in soil. "And then he got a tummy ache." "That makes sense," Alexander replied seriously, carefully positioning a dahlia bulb. "Too much fruit all at once would make anyone's stomach hurt, even a caterpillar's." "Do you think our flowers will get tummy aches if we give them too much water?" Maya asked with genuine concern. "I think they'll be just fine," Alexander assured her. "But maybe we should let this one rest for a bit before adding more water." Sarah smiled, remembering the man Alexander had been when she first started working here, driven, distant, always focused on the next deal. That man would never have spent a Saturday morning in the dirt, discussing caterpillars and flower digestion with a 4-year-old. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Chen. "The team just finished setting up the garden party. Come see." Today was Maya's 4th birthday, and Alexander had insisted on throwing what he called a proper celebration. Sarah had tried to talk him into something smaller, but he'd been adamant. Maya deserved magic, wonder, and all the celebration in the world. "Time to get cleaned up," Sarah called out to the garden. "Your party starts in 2 hours, birthday girl." Maya squealed with excitement, abandoning the watering can and racing toward Sarah. Alexander followed more slowly, brushing soil from his jeans, actual jeans, not the designer suits he used to wear even on weekends. As he reached the door, he caught Sarah's hand briefly, squeezing it. These small touches had become more common over the months. Nothing inappropriate, nothing they couldn't do in front of Maya, but small acknowledgments of the connection growing between them. They'd been taking it slowly, as promised, letting their relationship evolve naturally rather than forcing it into any particular shape. 2 hours later, the garden had been transformed into a fairy tale wonderland. String lights hung between trees, despite the afternoon sun. Tables covered in lavender cloths held plates of treats at child height. A face-painting station had been set up near the fountain. And in the center of it all was a castle-themed playground that had been delivered and assembled overnight. Alexander's birthday surprise for Maya. Mr. Alex. Maya gasped when she saw it, her eyes wide with wonder. Is that a real castle? It's a castle playground, Alexander explained, kneeling to her level. With slides and swings and a climbing wall. What do you think? Maya launched herself into his arms, hugging him tightly. It's perfect. You're the best, Mr. Alex. Over her head, Alexander met Sarah's eyes. Sarah felt tears threatening. Good tears, happy tears. Tears of gratitude for this man who had somehow become the father Maya had never had. The party was a success by any measure. Maya's preschool friends arrived with their parents, and while Sarah had worried about the awkwardness of hosting her daughter's party at her employer's mansion, Alexander had somehow made everyone feel welcome. He played games with the children, helped with face painting, and treated every parent with genuine friendliness rather than the distant politeness of wealth. Sarah found herself talking with another mother, Jessica, whose daughter Emma was Maya's best friend at school. Your husband is wonderful with the kids, Jessica commented, watching Alexander lead a group of children in a game of musical statues. Oh, he's not. We're not, Sarah stammered, feeling her face flush. Alexander is Maya's adoptive father, but we're not married. Jessica's eyes widened with understanding, then softened with something like admiration. Well, whatever your arrangement is, it's beautiful. I've never seen Maya anything but happy and confident. And the way he looks at her, and at you, that's real love. After the other families had left and Maya had crashed for a nap, exhausted by excitement and sugar, Sarah found Alexander on the terrace overlooking the garden. He'd loosened his collar and rolled up his sleeves, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. Thank you, she said, sitting beside him. For all of this. It was perfect. She deserved perfect, Alexander replied simply. Then, after a pause, can I ask you something? Always. Are you happy, Sarah? Really happy, not just grateful or comfortable, but actually happy. Sarah considered the question carefully. 3 years ago, she'd been a struggling single mother, working multiple jobs, constantly worried about making ends meet. 2 years ago, she'd started working at the mansion, grateful for stability but never imagining it could be more than that. 1 year ago, Maya had gone missing in the attic, and in finding her, Sarah had somehow found this, a family, a home, maybe even love. I'm happier than I ever thought I could be, she answered honestly. Sometimes I'm scared by how happy I am, like it's too good to be true. Alexander turned to face her fully, and in his eyes, she saw the same vulnerability she felt. I feel the same way. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for something to go wrong. But Sarah, I need you to understand something. He took her hand, the gesture now familiar and right. This isn't going to disappear. I'm not going to wake up one day and decide this isn't what I want. You and Maya, you're what I want. You're what I've always wanted, I just didn't know it until you showed me. Alexander. I know we're taking things slowly, he continued. I know there are complications and power dynamics and 1,000 reasons why this is unconventional. But I don't want to just be Maya's adoptive father. I don't want to just be your employer or your friend. He paused, gathering courage. I want to be your partner, Sarah. In raising Maya, in building a life, in everything. I'm in love with you. I've been in love with you for months now. Maybe since the day Maya went missing and I realized I'd do anything to help you find her. Sarah felt her breath catch. I'm in love with you too, she whispered. I've been trying not to be, trying to keep boundaries, trying to be sensible. But I can't help it. Watching you with Maya, seeing how you've changed, how you've let us change you. I fell in love with who you are, not what you have. Then be with me, Alexander said simply. Not as my employee, not as someone living in my house out of necessity, but as my partner. My equal. The person I build a life with. What does that look like? Sarah asked, her heart racing. Whatever we want to look like, Alexander replied. Maybe we start with dinner dates, just the two of us. Maybe we tell Maya that Mr. Alex and Mommy care about each other in a special way. Maybe eventually we merge your suite and my room into one family space. Maybe someday we get married. Or maybe we don't need the paperwork because we already know we're committed. He squeezed her hand. I don't have all the answers, Sarah. But I know I want to figure them out with you. Sarah looked out at the garden, at the fairy lights still twinkling in the growing dusk, at the castle playground that Alexander had built because Maya loved fairy tales. She thought about the journey that had brought them here, from employer and employee to something infinitely more precious. Okay, she said, turning back to Alexander. Let's try. Let's build this, slowly, carefully, always putting Maya first, but let's actually try. The smile that broke across Alexander's face was radiant. He raised her hand to his lips, kissing it gently, a gesture both old-fashioned and perfect. I promise you won't regret it. I know, Sarah said, and she meant it. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as a family. 18 months later, the Whitmore estate still stood grand and impressive, but it no longer felt cold or empty. Children's laughter echoed through halls that had once been silent. Crayon drawings decorated a refrigerator that was actually used for family meals rather than just storing bottled water and protein shakes. A reading corner had been established in the library, complete with bean bags and a shelf of children's books at Maya height. Sarah walked through the house with a different bearing now, not the careful deference of an employee, but the confidence of someone who belonged. She still managed some of the household operations, but as a choice rather than an obligation. Alexander had been right. She was excellent at management, and overseeing the estate staff was far more interesting than cleaning bathrooms. But more importantly, she was Alexander's fiancée now, wearing a simple but beautiful ring that he'd chosen with Maya's help. They'd gotten engaged 6 months ago, in the garden where they'd first talked about becoming a family, with Maya serving as both witness and enthusiastic supporter. The wedding was planned for next spring, a small ceremony in the garden, with Maya as flower girl and Mrs. Chun as Sarah's matron of honor. Nothing ostentatious, despite Alexander's wealth, because that's not who they were anymore. They were just a family, unconventional perhaps, but real and strong and full of love. Maya, now 5 years old, attended the private school Alexander had researched so carefully. She was thriving, confident, curious, kind. She called Alexander Daddy Alex, now, a compromise she'd come up with herself that honored both his role in her life and the fact that he hadn't been there from the beginning. She knew her story, how Mommy had worked hard to give her a good life, how she'd gotten lost in the big house, how Daddy Alex had helped find her and then decided to be her family forever. That evening, the three of them sat together in their merged living space, no longer Sarah's suite or Alexander's room, but their home within the mansion. Alexander was reading Maya a bedtime story, doing all the voices, while Sarah curled up beside them, simply watching and feeling grateful. The end, Alexander concluded, closing the book with a flourish. Again, Maya demanded, as she always did. Tomorrow, Alexander promised, kissing her forehead. It's bedtime for real now. Okay, Maya agreed, surprisingly compliant. Then, just as they were tucking her in, she asked, Daddy Alex? You're not going to leave, right? You're going to stay forever? Alexander's expression softened. Forever and ever, he promised. You're stuck with me, kiddo. I'm not going anywhere. Good, Maya said, satisfied. She hugged her stuffed rabbit, the same one that had been on her bed the morning she went missing, now worn but treasured. I love you, Daddy Alex. And Mommy. We love you too, Sarah whispered, her heart full. So much. After Maya was asleep, Sarah and Alexander stood at the window, looking out at the garden lights. "Do you ever think about how different everything could have been?" Sarah asked quietly. "If Maya hadn't wandered off that morning? If you'd reacted differently?" "All the time," Alexander admitted. "I think about the man I was before that day, focused on all the wrong things, missing out on everything that matters. And I think about how close I came to missing this." He wrapped his arm around Sarah's waist, pulling her close. "A little girl getting lost in my mansion was the best thing that ever happened to me because it helped me find my way home." Sarah leaned into him, feeling safe and loved and exactly where she was meant to be. Who would have thought, she mused. A billionaire, a maid, and her daughter. Not exactly a conventional family. "The best things never are," Alexander replied. "Besides, we're not a billionaire and a maid anymore. We're just a family. And that's everything." As they stood there together, in the house that had once been just a mansion but was now truly a home, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them here. It had started with fear, a mother's terror at her missing child. But it had become something beautiful, a story of second chances, of walls coming down, of love found in the most unexpected places. Maya had gotten lost, but in finding her, they'd all found something they didn't even know they were looking for, a family, a home, and a love that would last forever. And sometimes, Sarah thought, that's exactly how the best stories begin, with something broken that leads to something whole, with an ending that's really just a beginning, and with a family that proves that love doesn't care about conventions or status or backgrounds. Love just is strong and true and transformative, turning a mansion into a home and strangers into a family. That little girl who wandered into an attic seeking adventure had found something better than any fairy tale. She'd found a daddy who loved her, a home that was safe, and a future full of possibility. And her mother had found something too, a partner who saw her worth, who valued her strength, and who had fallen in love not with an employee, but with the fierce, devoted, incredible woman she was. As for Alexander, the billionaire who thought he had everything, he'd finally discovered what he'd been missing all along. Not another acquisition or achievement, but this, a sleeping child down the hall, a woman he loved beside him, and a heart that was finally, truly home.